evening, and welcome to another episode of Unlock the Door Radio. This is your host, Michael Cross here, and tonight we have a very special guest, that being Donna Anderson, who is going to tell us some of her work as well as how to spot people who may be the ultimate manipulators out there, that being psychopaths, I'm going to say / sociopaths. Hello, Donna.
Hi, Michael. Thank you for having me.
Hey, great to have you here. Tonight I'd like to really deal a lot with relationships because if we think about it, about 1 in 30-ish men are considered sociopathic or psychopathic, depending on the definition. About 1 or 2 out of 100 women, but I think that figure's probably higher. But essentially, what inspired you to start your work dealing with these psychopaths and sociopaths?
Well, I married one. My ex-husband took $250,000 from me. He cheated with at least 6 different women during our 2.5-year marriage. He had a child with one of those women, and then 10 days after I left him, he married the mother of the child, which turned out to be the second time that he committed bigamy. Now, this behavior made absolutely no sense to me until I figured out that he was a sociopath. And because of that, I researched more about the condition and founded my website, which is called lovefraud.com, and I've written 2 books on the topic. And I have now collected about 5,000 cases of people who have been involved with sociopaths.
Okay. Well, I'm going to get into this later. I'm kind of really interested in this because, in my book series, Freedom from Conscience series, the protagonist is kind of an anti-hero, a female psychopath, and we'll see if we can see if it connects there. But anyway, I want to mostly concentrate with your work here. Now, just to start, you have written that there's like 10 ways that you can spot someone. And could you just kind of maybe start with number 1? What is the first sign that person sitting across from you at the dinner table might actually be a psychopath or a sociopath? I'm just going to say psychopath from now on, and dispense with trying to, use both words.
Okay, well, the number 1 red flag that I've found through my research, and this included not only my own experience, but speaking to other people who have been involved with disordered persons, is unfortunately something that is really appealing. The number 1 red flag is charisma and charm. Sociopaths tend to have this appealing energy about them. They seem to be very exciting, and they're always smooth talkers. They always know what to say, always know how to make you feel important. And anytime you talk to them, they have an answer for anything. They never miss a beat. So, this is kind of disorienting because somebody who seems to be so charming and exciting and interesting and energetic, you don't want to think that person might actually be a predator.
So this is the kind of person who they seem to be the kind of person that's too good to be true. I hear a lot of women complain that nowadays men just don't know how to communicate.
And that's something that most sociopaths do really, really well. They have this golden tongue and this ability to say absolutely the right thing in any particular situation. But the problem is that what they're saying is not authentic. What they've done is they have figured out what you want to hear, and that's exactly what they say. So they're mouthing the words that you want to hear, but there's no substance behind them.
Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like being an actor or an actress then, and being able to convey exactly what they want you to hear. How do they gain that skill? If a person really doesn't have empathy, I've heard some people say that how can they possibly know what it is that they should say if they don't have the empathy to understand what you're thinking and what you desire?
They study you. I mean, this is what sociopaths are really, really skilled at. They have very good observation skills, and they actually learn what to do on a cognitive level. They actually like watch movies and observe people and see what other people tend to do. I've heard cases of people saying that they could watch the person kind of, looking around the room to see what other people are doing in reaction to any situation so that they can figure out how they're supposed to behave.
Mm-hmm. So this must start as young children. It seems to, in my book series, I present the girl, she gets bullied, she doesn't fit in very well, and she kind of starts to study the way people speak and how they react and stuff. So this must be, what they do from day one then when they see that they're a little bit different.
Yes, that's one way of looking at it, but the key to understanding this disorder is to realize that it is highly genetic. So what happens is that folks who are born with this disorder, children born with this disorder, actually, in order to not turn out that way, they need to receive very extraordinary parenting. Usually what happens is that a child is born with this disorder, and because it is inherited, one of their parents, or perhaps both, is usually sociopathic. Sociopaths make terrible parents. So what happens is there's this interplay between nature and nurture in that they're born with the disorder and then they get this terrible parenting, which makes them into the sociopathic person. But this can start at a very, very young age. I've spoken with folks who recognize that their children were disordered as early as 3 and 4 years old.
Mm-hmm. Well, how do they act? I mean, how are they different? I don't create a witch hunt for little kids, but how did they act that was really different?
The way that it starts, believe it or not, is that the children are fearless. They have absolutely no fear of anything. Normal kids or kids who aren't disordered, they worry when they're not with their parents. They have fears of, monsters in the closet or whatever. But children who are disordered simply do not have these fears. They tend to also be highly independent. Now, this doesn't sound terrible, but what it means is that they do not have a need for love. They do not have a need for their parents' love or the love of their families. And this is the core of the disorder. It is an inability to love. So the kids, unfortunately, grow up not needing love and therefore not developing the skill to love.
Okay, they must form some sort of like attachment situations. The idea that they need the mom or the dad or so forth, right?
Yes, but it's not an emotional attachment. They recognize that they get things from their mothers and fathers. They provide food and clothes and toys and whatever, but there isn't an empathetic connection with their parents. And I mean, I have many, many cases of people who have been involved with sociopaths and had children with them, and then to their horror realized that the child may inherit this predisposition. So what someone in this situation needs to do is actually teach the children how to love, because it is not an inborn skill if someone is disordered.
Mm-hmm. That's actually interesting. To teach the children a certain amount of empathy and love and so forth. I think that would be good for all kids, not just when people are worried that they might be having a kid that has these traits. The interesting thing is, I was actually talking to someone who, she's like a career woman. She's kind of aiming towards career woman type thing, and she was saying that she might just decide to be a single mother someday, go to a sperm bank or whatever. And she kind of said, in all seriousness, that she would actually like it if she had children that were psychopathic, because she said they'd be successful. Have you ever heard people say that?
Yes, actually I have. There are some professionals, professional researchers who have attempted to make that argument. They do recognize that there are many, many psychopathic individuals who are high up in corporations, and this is true. It's been documented. But what also tends to happen is that sooner or later, many of these businesses crash and burn. I don't think anybody should consciously choose to become involved with, or certainly not have children with, someone who has a psychopathic personality disorder. That's an outrageously ridiculous thing to do, and I'm sorry, but your friend who suggested this really needs to rethink that.
Yeah, maybe she's too much into the whole evolutionary psychology thing there. Like on a personal level, it seems like there'd be a lot of special, what would you call it? I'm not going to say special needs, but it would be.
Let me tell you, it is a nightmare. The people that I speak with who have children who they realize are disordered are heartbroken. They can't control these kids. The kids can become violent. They lie. They manipulate. They accuse. It is not a pleasant experience at all. This is really a bad, bad situation.
Yeah. By the way, I want you to make a plug for your book there. I'm sorry. I think I kind of skipped over that.
Okay. Well, I have two actually. My first book is called Love Fraud, and it tells my personal story of being involved with a sociopath. It reads like a cross between a true crime novel and a spiritual journey. And the second book is called Red Flags of Love Fraud, 10 Signs You're Dating a Sociopath. And this is a straight self-help type of work that people can use to figure out whether or not they really are involved with someone who is disordered.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And of course, if they just look up your website, Donna Anderson / sociopath, psychopath, they'll find it on the internet as well.
The website is called lovefraud.com, and I have now, about 2,500 articles, a couple 100,000 comments. It's really very interesting, and a lot of people have told me that it's the best resource on the internet for folks who may suspect that they are involved with someone who is personality disordered.
Mm-hmm. Very good. I encourage people to check it out. Hey, okay, so we got down that the person sitting there, whether man or woman, will say just the right things and be very charming and very charismatic. What's number 2 on your watch list?
Number 2 is something that I call sudden soulmates. And what that means is when you meet a sociopath, you feel like you've met the person you've been waiting for all your life. You seem to have all the same interests and all the same expectations and precisely the same outlook on life. And there's a reason for this. And the reason is that the sociopath studies you, figures out what it is that you're looking for, and then turns himself or herself into your ideal partner.
Mm-hmm. So, give me an example how a woman might do that when she's got the guy there, he's a nice guy and everything, and she likes him. She obviously is attracted to him for some reason. So, what would she do there at the table or in relationship in general?
Are you suggesting that the woman is the sociopath?
In this case, let's jump back and forth. In this one, let's pretend it's the woman. Number 3, we'll go for the man.
Okay. Well, what she will do is figure out what the guy is looking for by asking questions. This is one thing that all sociopaths do. They ask a lot of questions and they listen very, very carefully to the answers. Now, if you're on the receiving end of this, you think that this person is smitten with you. They're just so enthralled with you that they want to know everything about you. But what they're doing is they're gathering ammunition, for figuring out how they're going to seduce you and hook you. So, like, if the guy says, oh, I like people who are, like, really, really feminine, then, the woman starts acting in a very feminine way and dressing provocatively and things like that. Or if the guy says something like, oh, I like someone who can stand up for herself, well, then the woman will do that. So whatever it is that the guy says that he likes or responds favorably to, that's what the woman will do.
Mm-hmm. So mirroring, essentially.
Yes. In fact, I did a couple of surveys, which is where I got a lot of the information, the data, as far as, what these signs are. And one person actually wrote in her survey response, said, I met my twin. This person was everything. He was just like me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then, of course, things crash there. We'll get to that later. Okay, so we got the sudden soulmate thing there. Number 3, let's say this time it's a guy. What's the next really dangerous thing to look for?
Well, the next thing on my list is sexual magnetism. Most sociopaths are highly, highly sexual. A lot of people have told me that being with them physically was like the best sexual experience they ever had. And there's a reason for this. And the reason is that they all have high levels of testosterone, both men and women sociopaths, very high level of testosterone. That's one of the keys of this disorder. And so essentially the person is incredibly sexy and, they seem to be very exciting. And people have told me that, the experience for the most part has been extraordinary, at least in the beginning. While the sociopath is still trying to hook you. Later on, they may find that the interest wanes, and that's often because, the sociopath quickly gets bored and is on to another target.
So essentially, a person who is extremely uninhibited, it's also true too that a person who might be somewhat reserved might be even more vulnerable because the psychopath could figure out, they're going to expose them to different things. They're going to maybe open their eyes up to different ways of experiencing sexuality. And of course, this is going to make that person feel a rush, but also an attachment, won't it?
Yes, all of that absolutely happens. And sociopaths are into experimentation, and when they get bored with the experimentation, they move on to things that are taboo, and they do push people's boundaries, and that does have the effect of making someone attached to them, because there's that neurochemical oxytocin that is released during any type of intimacy, especially sexuality, and it has the effect of making people attach. And so I don't know how sociopaths know it, but they seem to know that if they can get someone hooked sexually, they've got their claws into this person. And so they very frequently pursue a sexual involvement very quickly.
Yeah, I've also read that if a person does things that are counter to the way that they were raised or their personal beliefs, the irony is that their brains will release serotonin, which is the feel-good hormone, which means that you're getting a combination then if you've been brought into I'm going to use this analogy, the spider's web. You're getting the oxytocin, but you're also getting the serotonin as they are manipulating you into this new way of life. And so it seems like that's a double bind that will, you're on a thrill ride, but then at some point the ride ends.
Not only that, but the dopamine gets involved as well. You have all this energy and excitement about what's going on. So, that's actually one of the real problems with people getting involved with sociopaths, is that any sexual encounter causes changes in your brain. And a sociopathic encounter, because of how extreme it is, causes even more changes in the brain. So that's one of the real dangers of becoming physically involved with a sociopath, is that it causes both chemical and structural changes in the brain. And that's also what makes it so difficult to leave them, because, your brain has been changed and you actually have to undo all those changes in order to escape the relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, of course, if this person has a great deal of this need for excitement, that's when they're going to be cheating on you, but then trying to twist it around to make it look like, it's okay, I assume.
That's exactly what they do. In fact, when someone discovers that a sociopathic partner has been cheating, A couple of things typically happen. First of all, the sociopath will deny. I mean, I've had cases of people who have caught the person in bed with somebody else and they denied, which is pretty amazing. And then the next thing that happens is if they actually begrudgingly admit that they have been with someone else, they turn it around and say it's their partner's fault, because the partner drove them to cheat. That's typically what happens.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, and of course their charisma and charm, they can probably even convince the victim that it was their fault.
That happens all the time. It's not only the charisma and charm, but it's the self-righteousness with which a sociopath will blame the other person for anything that he actually does, assuming we're talking about a male sociopath. And yeah, I mean, I have many, many cases of folks who did actually start to question themselves and feel that it must be their fault. I mean, this is actually one of the big hooks that the sociopath uses to keep people in the relationship. They convince them that all the problems are the partner's fault.
Mm-hmm. And do they tend to find people? Do they seem to have a sense for the people that might have a strong guilt complex? Because, of course, the psychopath does not really have that much of a guilt complex. They have maybe they don't like to lose, so they may feel bad about maybe, not passing an exam or something in college, but they won't feel guilty about the fact that they may have spent the weekend partying and didn't study for it. Is that correct?
Well, keeping on as far as the relationship is concerned, they don't necessarily look for somebody who has a guilt complex. In fact, it's one of the ironies of people who are involved with sociopaths is that, especially when you're talking about a male sociopath, psychopath targeting a female, the women generally are accomplished, powerful, not shrinking violence, professional, people who really have a lot going for them. And a colleague of mine has done some research on this to figure out what makes a woman vulnerable to a male psychopath. And one of the things is that they have in common is that they're extroverted. And another thing is that they tend to be highly invested in relationships. And they tend to be very caring. So these are the types of folks that get targeted.
Okay, so they're actually looking for a nurturer to a large degree. I mean, they're going to get the person who is both successful but also nurturer then that seems to fulfill everything that they're looking for then.
Sociopaths typically target people who are nurturers. This is actually very correct. They go after people who are therapists, who are teachers, who are nurses. That's one of the things that they do. They recognize that these folks have empathy, and even though they don't have empathy, they recognize that if someone else has empathy, it makes them easier to manipulate.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Well, let's move on to number 4 here. What's the fourth sign that you are in the crosshairs of a psychopath?
It's something that I call love bombing. And what that means is the sociopath will shower you with attention. They'll tell you how wonderful you are. They'll want to be with you all the time. And one of the things that they'll do is that they will maintain communication constantly. They're always sending texts, always sending emails. And it's a way that they express their adoration. So if you're on the receiving end of this, I mean, you think that this person is just so enamored with you that they can't bear to be away from you, and it's a highly intoxicating feeling.
Okay, so you're getting a lot of attention, a lot of communication. Again, I have to just say, I hear from a lot of women in their 20s and 30s who get really frustrated that men today just don't know how to really, like I said, first of all, communicate, but also not really connect. And it seems like you're going to suddenly be getting some guy who actually wants to be connected. It seems to be interested in what you're doing all the time.
And that's exactly why it's so seductive, because if a woman has been going or meeting guys who, just simply want to group date or, don't really want to make an effort to be with a particular person or don't even know how to ask a person on a date, and all of a sudden this guy sweeps in and he's showering you with attention and telling you how beautiful you are and how loving. I mean, you feel like this is the person you've been waiting for all your life, and it is very, very seductive.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Well, let's move on here. We can go back and reflect a few of those. So, number 5.
Okay, well, here's an important point. The first 4 items that I mentioned, the first 4 red flags of love fraud, are all things that seem to be wonderful in a date. We talked about charisma and charm, we talked about sudden soulmates, we talked about sexual magnetism, and we talked about love bombing. I mean, who wouldn't want to date somebody who is charming and sexy and attentive? So it's very important to know what the more negative traits are. So number 5 on my list is blames others for everything. Nothing is ever a sociopath's fault. They never take responsibility for anything that happens. When there's a problem, it's always because someone else did them wrong, somebody else has it out for them, somebody else didn't do what they were supposed to do. And a sociopath will always blame other people for anything that goes bad.
Okay, so essentially you're looking for a pattern that, their parents didn't do it right, their schools didn't do it right, or those kinds of things?
Absolutely. They blame their crazy ex-wife, they blame their boss is stupid, their fathers was abusive, the mother was neglectful. They always have a sob story. Mm-hmm.
And do you have any? Well, no, I'll go back there. There was a question that came up there. But anyway, so number 6, after blames others.
Okay, number 6 is lies and gaps in the stories. All sociopaths lie. They tell big lies, they tell little lies, they tell stupid lies, they lie when they would be better off telling the truth, and then they neglect to tell you things that they should tell you, like perhaps the fact that they're already married. So this is a big one. If somebody isn't lying, they're not a sociopath.
Okay. Does that also include like the political type lie where someone, they tell the truth, but in a way that your interpretation will put the blame on you?
Well, the thing to keep in mind is that this disorder is a syndrome. And what that means is a collection of all these different traits and behaviors. So not everybody who lies is a sociopath, but all sociopaths will lie in one form or another. So if you see someone who is lying and you also see the other traits that we talked about and the others that we're going to mention, then you need to be careful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, lying should come up as a huge red flag in a relationship right off the bat. And,
absolutely. In fact, if somebody lies about their identity, you should never date that person. You should get rid of them immediately.
So could that include if they're lying about their age or lying about...
Yes. Okay. I mean, someone who is not strong enough to, even if they aren't a sociopath, why would you want to be with someone who lies about their age? I mean, the whole idea of a relationship is to be able to trust each other. And, if they lie about something like that, what else are they lying about?
Good point. Yeah. Okay. Number 7.
The number 7 is intense eye contact. Sometimes this is referred to as the predatory stare. So if you ever get the feeling that, somebody is looking at you like the next meal in a figurative sense, you really should pay attention to that. Now, this is an important characteristic because it's the only one that is physical. It's the only thing that may tip you off that from a visual perspective that somebody may be disordered.
Mm-hmm. Well, does this mean that all psychopaths have this or just the majority?
I think my research put it at somewhere between 60 and 70% of the respondents indicated that they saw this in the person they were involved with. And another aspect of it is that sometimes you look at their eyes and you can see that there's nobody home inside. I refer to it as shark eyes. They're just kind of black and dead. And sometimes you can actually see this better in a photograph than when you're actually with the person.
Oh, interesting. I almost feel like asking you to tell me if there's any politicians out there that you can see that in. But, so it's kind of I heard this, one actress that was really famous in the 30s. I don't know if she was a psychopath, but they mentioned that she had this kind of glassy stare. And, it mentioned that she did not have this documentary I was watching mentioned that she was such a good actress because she really, could just be filled in. She could act the part because she didn't really, it was almost like she had no persona of her own. So then when she went out and actually did her part, she just took on the parts really well. That sounds, maybe she was, but that thing about the eyes, that reminded me of this documentary.
Well, it's possible because sociopaths are typically chameleons. I mean, they don't have anything inside, and they have the capacity of putting on a new personality like the rest of us put on a coat. So it's quite possible that maybe that was the case with her.
That almost reminds me, I mean, when I was in college, I knew people that, men who would go and, they would join in with, they'd join some group that they knew there was lots of women, an animal rights group or something. And they would say that they had no interest in animal rights, but they knew how to play the part. And, of course, you knew where that would take them. So that sounds very psychopathic to me.
I do know of people who are psychopaths who joined animal rights organizations. So yes, it does happen.
Okay. Yeah. But they're not interested in the core animals. They're interested in pretending like they care a lot. Okay. We'll get back to that one. Number 8.
Number 8 is moves fast to hook up. A sociopath typically will come into this whirlwind romance, will sweep you off your feet, will quickly want to proclaim true love and quickly start talking about moving in together, getting married, and having a family. A lot of people, say that the experience was just a whirlwind romance that swept them off their feet.
Well, why would they act that way? I mean, what's the explanation?
The explanation is they want to get their hooks into you before you escape.
So it seems to me that they would also have a tendency to try to break you away from your friends and family, that might threaten the relationship.
That is a very typical sociopathic tactic. They often, almost always, attempt to isolate their target from their support systems. So absolutely, that's what they do.
Okay, so they might be really quick to say, let's go move in, let's just go move over way away from this city and start over or something like that. Oh.
I have cases like that. Absolutely. And, it's very scary because I do have cases where, the sociopath has convinced his partner to move out into the sticks, out into a very remote area. And it's dangerous, because the person is away. And then often what happens, especially if they're married or maybe even if they're not married, the sociopath takes over the finances of the relationship. And so the victim is trapped. I mean, they're far away and they have no money and it's very difficult to get out.
So that, I mean, I'm going to get back to this here. I'll just put a note there for something different. So number 9.
Number 9 is the pity play. And what that means is that sociopaths typically appeal to their target's sympathy. They complain and talk about, their terrible experiences with their crazy ex-wife and their parents and how their financial problems, and everything that they say is to try to make you to feel sorry for them so that you will do what they want.
And
of course, these sob stories may or may not be true because they lie a lot.
and they can be embellished, if nothing else. And finally,
Yes.
number 10.
Number 10 is the Jekyll and Hyde personality. Sometimes when you're with a sociopath, one minute they love you, the next minute they hate you. It changes like a switch has flicked and you have absolutely no idea what happened.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's similar to borderline, but, well, I mean, is it similar to borderline in that sense, or is there something that they may show the same symptom, but it's different?
A lot of those cluster B disorders are very, very similar. We're talking about antisocial personality disorder, which is also sociopathy, and narcissism and borderline personality disorder. You know, the differences between them are subject to debate and, you know, perhaps not even relevant. In fact, you know, when I define the word sociopath, I use it to encompass all these personality types because they are all exploiters. The antisocials, the borderlines, and the narcissists, I mean, to one degree or another, this is what they do. They exploit the people around them. And if you add up the official estimates of folks who have those disorders, it comes to like 12% of the population. And in the United States, at least, that's 37 million people. So there are many, many people out there, far more than we realize, who you absolutely do not want to become involved in a relationship with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it would make things really difficult. I wonder what happens when I should ask, what happens when someone gets together with someone? Like, you might get a psychopath that hooks up with a borderline. I mean, what would happen in that relationship?
It's like fire and gasoline. You know, it can like really be violent. It can, I mean, either physically or emotionally violent, psychologically violent. Sometimes they support each other. Sometimes they're like co-conspirators, but it's a pretty explosive situation. Wow.
It sounds like I got that right in my book because that's what I do. I connect a borderline and a psychopath together. Yeah, that's interesting. Now, there's something, I think I read it on your site, correct me if I'm wrong, but on the thing about the sexuality and romance, to a psychopath, isn't sex it's an accomplishment. It's almost like a scoreboard, isn't it? It's not really an act of expression.
Psychopaths are only interested in three things: power, control, and sex. And that's it. So for them, the sex is more just about the release. It's about the sensation. One of the traits of a psychopath is that they have this incredible need for excitement, and sex is about one of the most exciting things that any human being can do. So that's one of the reasons that they pursue it. It has absolutely nothing to do with any kind of emotional connection. In fact, they are incapable of an emotional connection with the person that they're having sex with, even though they can be very good at pretending that they have this emotional connection.
Mm-hmm. So in a sense then it's almost like winning a race or something to them. You know, the act of seduction would be to win. It wouldn't be.
Can you say that again, please?
It seems then that the act of seduction would actually be like someone would, be playing in a race or something and, trying to win it versus trying to express some sort of mutual feeling of admiration towards one another.
That is absolutely correct. And in fact, I do have cases where a psychopath toyed with the target and, did everything they could to get the target to fall in love with them. And as soon as the target did, the sociopath dumped them. I mean, the whole thing was just a game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually knew a woman who she bragged about the idea that she was able to, she thought it was cool that she could seduce other women. And then, she had no intention of forming a relationship with them. She just thought, even though, she gravitated towards, she said that her goal someday is to marry a man. She felt that it was fun to essentially mess with someone's mind and see how far she could take it.
That is typical psychopathic behavior.
Yeah, just the idea of, it's almost like the person's an experiment.
Yes. It's like a cat playing with a mouse, batting it around, just to torture them before eventually going in for the kill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because she would actually say that, that it was interesting how she just totally affected the person's life and may have caused trouble with the parents and stuff like that. And then just kind of said bye-bye, and it didn't bother her at all. Now I'm going to ask this though. I have to bring this up because there may be someone out there listening who says, well, yeah, I'm psychopathic, but, can a psychopath actually be a good husband or wife or boyfriend or girlfriend in a kind of a symbiotic sense or something, but can they actually be the person who could actually be a good father or mother? But of course, some things are going to be missing. What do you think?
I think no. I think anybody who wants to have any kind of fulfilling marriage should not be involved with a psychopath. Remember, the whole point of marriage is to be with someone who loves you, and psychopaths are not capable of love. So, depending on the degree of disorder, at the very least, the relationship will be empty or sterile, and at the very most, it could be highly abusive. Mm-hmm. So it's not going to be good. Nobody should get involved knowingly with a psychopath.
Okay, so you don't think there's any room for what one could call dark loyalty, where someone's loyal, but it's on like a business level. I mean, they're...
Well, who wants that in a marriage?
Okay, that's a good point. That's a good point. I was just wondering if you've actually met people who will defend their husband or wife and say, well, yes, he or she is psychopathic, but they do this for me and this for me and this for me, and we've been married for 15 years. Have you ever gotten that?
Usually when people come to love fraud, it's because they are in such pain and so upset about whatever's going on in their relationship that's not usually what I hear. There are certainly cases of people who essentially are mutually using each other, which I think is what you're describing, but I don't think I would call that a marriage.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that could actually describe it, more of the business style approach. I'm just curious, have you ever had two psychopaths that cross paths and wind up together, and is it as explosive as with a borderline and a psychopath, or is it well, what happens in those cases where two manipulators wind up with it? Is it like putting two spiders in the same jar, like kids do?
Well, I have had people tell me about that. In fact, I have a woman who is now writing on my website. Her name is Wendy Weber, and she says that both of her parents were psychopaths. And she actually says that her father was extremely violent, but the mother was worse because she was so deceitful and manipulative. Mm-hmm. And it was bad. I mean, they beat up on each other. They beat up on the kids. It was a terrible, terrible upbringing. So it's just an awful situation. And, unfortunately, the people who suffer the most are any children from this situation.
Yeah. And if they happen to inherit the disorder, then you've got a possibility of a serial killer coming out of that one. Seems to be the trait that runs through all serial killers, have some sort of abusive, neglectful childhood.
Well, yes, but not every person who was abused becomes a serial killer. I mean, the foundation is that they inherited the genetics from somewhere on their family tree.
Yeah, and then have something bad happen. Sounds like they'd be fantastic cult leaders. They could gain a following pretty easy.
Cult leaders are sociopaths on steroids.
I love that one. Sociopaths on steroids.
Yes, they absolutely all have these traits. They're charismatic, they're manipulative, And, this is what they do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I was thinking that there was a documentary about a guy who just wanted to see if he could be a cult leader. And so he pretended to be a guru, but at the beginning he interviewed some gurus that it seemed like they were just kind of in it for these young women. It seemed that they were in it because there was all these young women who were trying to find nirvana or something, and of course these guys were more than willing to show them in their own ways. So it just struck me that if someone was a cult leader, they could fulfill all of their fantasies and they'd have no problems.
That absolutely is the case. In fact, I just wrote a story for the Daily Mail, which will be going up in a couple of days, precisely on that situation, about this woman, who became a dancer, this Butoh Japanese style of dance, and the leader seduced her, and she eventually committed suicide because of what happened, and her family has come to the conclusion that the guy is a cult leader.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You ever watch Walking Dead?
I'm afraid I don't. Sorry.
Okay, because there's a character called the Governor, and he's just like the perfect political psychopath. But he's kind of a cult following type thing. But tell me, essentially, we've kind of gone over the specifics of how to find out if you may be dating one of these kinds of people. But essentially, tell me the evolution of a relationship. Okay, let's say a woman does wind up with one of these guys. There must be a kind of typical progression of the relationship from like first date to whatever the end of this relationship is. Could you kind of tell us what that would be?
Well, in most cases, what happens is there's this whirlwind romance in the beginning, and the woman is swept off her feet, and of course it could be a guy too, because it works both ways. And, the beginning of it is highly exciting, and you feel like you found the person you've been waiting for all your life. And the sociopath can keep this up until he feels that you're hooked. Until you make a commitment. And what typically happens is that, once the person has committed, there's this change in the personality of the predator. All of a sudden he's not talking so much about how much he loves you, and you feel like you're being manipulated and used, and, he's looking for money all the time, or any of these situations. Often what happens is that the target will realize that, something is off here, and will attempt to break off the relationship. And then all of a sudden, the sociopath is back to his old self, back to the love bombing, back to telling how wonderful she is, or pleading and crying and not wanting the person to leave and not wanting the relationship to end. And so typically the target will give the person another chance. And this can turn into a vicious circle where, there's this whole pattern of, everything is great, and then it becomes bad, and then the target tries to leave, and the sociopath wants to lure them back. And this can go on and on and on, and actually is often the situation which occurs in situations that lead up to domestic violence. So there does tend to be this vicious circle of going around and around and around.
Mm-hmm. And so about what point do people usually break it off, and what's the psychological ramifications if they do?
Well, it's kind of hard to generalize about that, but these relationships are highly addictive, and that's why it's often so difficult for people to leave. Because of what we talked about before with the oxytocin and the changes in the brain, people end up becoming addicted to the relationship. So in order to break it off, they need to do two things. First of all, they need to get away and establish what we call no contact, which means to have no further contact with the individual. And then they have to treat their recovery just like recovering from an addiction. You have to take it one day at a time and try to stay away from the person and eventually get to the point where the person isn't taking up all the space in your brain.
Mm-hmm. How does a psychopath react to that? It seems to me that there'd be either they could go one direction and really be fixated on this person, or they could go the other direction and almost like, I've heard some psychopaths can, like, if they plan on doing something with their best friend, like, I don't know, go hang gliding or something the next day and their friend dies, then they could be on the phone within 10 minutes of learning that their friend died and trying to find someone else to go hang gliding with them the next day. I mean, which direction do you usually see, psychopaths go?
They go both of those directions. I mean, in some cases, they become obsessed with their target and pursue them again and try to get them back. In other cases, they just walk away. In fact, that's one of the things that is often so shocking to a target is that, the relationship is over and the guy is gone and he's got a new girlfriend within 3 days.
Mm-hmm. And unless there's children involved, there's probably, it could be like that relationship never existed then, even if it was a marriage.
That happens, yes. And, the children are kind of irrelevant. I mean, both things happen. Either the guy will, pursue the target using the children as pawns in order to do that, or he'll walk away from the whole family. I mean, either of those things could happen.
Now, this is more speculative, but, getting back to that original point I brought up about, the whole thing about the gal I know who was talking about she'd really like to have sociopathic kids. Is there, if this is genetic, are we going to see in the future more and more people with this disorder just because of the fact it seems that maybe I've seen a lot of relationships where, you get a guy who may exhibit these kinds of traits, gets together with a gal, they have a couple of kids, the marriage breaks up, she finds a very nurturing guy later on, and, they take care of the kids, and he doesn't have any kids with her, but this other guy has already spread his genes. Can this actually mean that in the future we'll have more of this?
There's some interesting research going on in genetics now in the field of epigenetics. And what they found is that genes aren't permanent and genes can be changed through experience. So that actually gives a little bit of hope that because someone inherits the genes for this disorder doesn't necessarily mean that it has to come to fruition. And, this is really important because genetics actually, like changes to genetics can go through several generations. So it may actually be possible that providing the right experiences to a child, it doesn't work real good with adults, but if you work with a child, you can prevent the disorder from developing. And perhaps those changes will actually change the genes themselves so that it puts an end to that particular line of the disorder.
Interesting. I could explain why. You ever hear of James Fallon, the researcher?
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he said that even though he found that he had a lot of the markers or physical characteristics, in his background, he did say that he had a very, very, very nurturing, loving family when he was growing up, and that steered him in the right direction. That could be the reason.
It absolutely could be, and I mean, that is the hope for parents who realize that their partner is disordered. Mm. And I mean, it's not easy to do it all. Because the children who have this genetic predisposition can be very, very, very challenging. But otherwise, the person could turn into a criminal or at the very least, this ruthless individual who exploits everyone in their lives. So I think parents, can take some hope in the idea that they may possibly be able to make a difference.
Mm-hmm. Do you think our society rewards psychopathy? It almost makes it something that some people might want to be, because, I mean, who wouldn't want to be charming, get your way all the time, climb the career ladder? It's almost like many of I'm not going to name any TV programs right off here, but it seems like a lot of the main characters that are developed, you could sit back and do a psychological profile on and they'd score very high on the psychopathic level, but yet the audiences love them.
I do think that the way society is structured, especially in the U.S., I can't speak for Sweden, but for the U.S., there is an emphasis on winning. There is an emphasis on individuality. There is an emphasis on getting ahead. And so, yes, these types of societal imperatives do lead to people who have psychopathic traits being admired. But I really think that that's short-sighted for society as a whole, because what we really need to keep our planet from exploding is more empathy and more people caring about each other. So I do hope that somehow we will see that these are the traits that need to be developed, essentially, in order to save all of us.
Yeah, because if everyone's a cutthroat, whether that's in politics or relationships, it seems like that's just going to create more tension, and so forth, as opposed to if empathetic people, I sometimes wonder if people that go in and donate eggs or something like that, are these people doing it because they're highly empathetic, or are they maybe very narcissistic, which seems to have an overlap with psychopathy, and therefore we're going to get more people with these genes? I don't know.
Well, I do know that I've posted a case on my website about this guy who was essentially infiltrating sperm donor clinics, and he turned out to be psychopathic. And so, yeah, I mean, that does happen.
Be interesting to, from a psychological point of view, it'd be interesting to see how that affected the children that came from those. He may have 20 kids out there. It'd be interesting to see if that got passed on. Hopefully it didn't.
Actually, I think the estimate was more like 150.
Ooh, 150. Well, be watching for those guys in politics. Okay, well, we're at an end here. And again, for those people who want a copy of your work, is it on Amazon?
Oh, yes. You can go to Amazon. My two books are called Love Fraud, and the other one is called Red Flags of Love Fraud, 10 Signs You're Dating a Sociopath. I also have lots and lots of information on my website, lovefraud.com. So I do invite your listeners to visit, and they'll learn a lot more about this condition. Oh, excellent. I would encourage them to do so as well. Okay, well, thank you for this very, very, very informative hour here, and I wish you luck in your further research. Terrific. Thank you so much, Michael. I appreciate it. And thank you. Okay, and that ends another episode of Unlock the Door Radio. Take care. Bye now.
Today I am joined by researchers who invent some of the most advanced metals on the planet, designers who are modeling prototypes in the digital cloud, folks from the Pentagon who help to support their work. Basically, I'm here to announce that we're building Iron Man.
For more news, visit youtube.com/pigmind5.
This is Ozzy Skateboard, and you're listening to